All right, looks like we are going live. Should be going live. So welcome everybody to episode number 1 of Expert Witness with Doug Miner and Steven Palmieri. Doug Miner, how are you doing this afternoon, sir?
Good. Excited to do this. This will be fun.
Man, are you joining us from sunny California? Is that where you are in this world?
Sure, of course. Southern California. It never rains in California, right?
Look at that. Awesome. So for those of you guys who are watching us, for 2021, this is actually right at the 1-year anniversary of this, the Facebook group here, the Pre-Lit group. And we want to bring some amazing new content out to you guys. And so we've got several new shows we've slated. The first and third Thursday of every month is going to be Expert Witness with Doug Miner and Steven Palmieri, where we're going to come to you with all things Expert Witness. And the second and fourth Thursdays, we're going to have Legal Ease with John Watts and Steven Palmieri. And John's an attorney. He goes toe-to-toe with these badasses all the time. So welcome to the flagship episode. And Doug, glad to have you here. So for those folks who don't know you, I mean, it's not just like you went to some little Expert Witness Academy and bought a piece of paper. You have been in hundreds of court cases, have you not?
So yeah, over 100 cases over the last decade, and started out just like most of your viewers as I ran a credit repair company back in the day.
So you're one of the common folk is what you're saying, huh? You're an average man.
I guess what I'm saying, I have a pretty good idea of where your audience is at or what they're doing, and sort of making that transition from where they are to what I do now. It's if they choose to do it, they can do it. I guess I'm just sort of living proof that it can happen if you truly want to, right?
Good stuff, man. Yeah. So for those folks who are watching this, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. So you started off in credit repair as a credit repair business owner, and then next thing you know, a few years later, you woke up and you've got like hundreds of lawsuits under your belt. Like between those 2 points in time, what happened there? How did it get to be where you went from credit repair business owner solely to now solely doing Expert Witness and getting paid for those services?
Yeah, it's I think it starts a little bit before starting up the credit repair company. I was in the mortgage industry for a long time, right? Whether it was processing, underwriting, originating, doing loans, and dealing with financial situations with people. Obviously, that's where I got exposed to credit and how to help people. And it's funny, I started doing credit repair with clients that were mortgage clients before I ever started the credit repair side of it. I just wanted their credit to be better so I could get them the loan. And so then I started up the credit repair company in 2006. And people in my office started seeing what I was doing. And then obviously the financial crisis happened. And mortgage lending pretty much dried up at that point. But I had already started the credit repair. So I just transitioned right into doing credit repair from that point, full time. But anybody who's been in credit repair a long time knows that was a little bit of a difficult time as well, because most people didn't have money to pay for credit repair back then. But how I transitioned into doing the Expert Witness work was, first and foremost, it was completely by accident. I had a guy by the name of Ed Crane. He did a magazine for mortgage brokers up in San Francisco, and I'd written an article for him and spoken to him many times, and he referred a law firm to me. And the very first case was the law firm called me and asked me, Doug, can you tell us what it's worth? An escrow company didn't reconvey a deed of trust correctly, or a satisfied judgment, excuse me. And the judgment was still showing up on the credit report as unsatisfied, and how that affected somebody. And in this 5-minute conversation at the end, the guy said, well, how much would you charge to do that? And I said, $1,500. And it was just the number that popped in my head. There was no rhyme or reason to it. That's what happened. So the guy the attorney sent me the documents. I drafted up, I think it was a 3-page little report with the calculations that I had made and the credit impact and so forth. And thought, wow, that was the easiest $1,500 I ever made. And then about 2 weeks after that, the attorney called me and said, hey, Doug, what else do we owe you? Everything worked out great. Thanks for your help. And I said, oh, I'll have my assistant send you an invoice. So I sent him an invoice for another $750. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, what just happened? I didn't even understand. And the words expert witness were never said, spoken, ever even, nothing along those lines. So I asked some attorney friends of mine, and the attorney friend of mine is actually the one who said, oh, Doug, he used you as an expert. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he explained it to me. And I thought, oh, okay. And he says, well, do you really quantify the damages? And I said, yeah. He said, how'd you do that? And I explained to him how I made the calculations and what they call the methodology behind it. And he said, wow, Doug, you really are onto something. And so the light bulb was sort of turned on in my head, like, wow, I need to sort of explore this a little bit more. And so let's say, actually, the first expert witness training I went to was with John Olsheimer and Ed Jameson way back in the day.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I went to some other expert witness just to get a different idea, read a bunch of books. And as I was running the credit repair company, I started marketing the expert witness services. And so there was a natural progression. It took maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and I transitioned away from just doing strictly credit repair to now mostly exclusively doing more expert witness work. But I still do consultations with individual people. I do speaking engagements for different offices, let's say real estate offices or mortgage companies. And obviously I've written the one book and I have another book that's coming out. It's kind of, and the book that I wrote that's coming out it's called Your Credit, Your Life. And it's basically stories about expert witness cases and scenarios in dealing in credit repair and then mortgage and divorce and all the stuff that goes along with it.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about what is really your expert designation, right? So like when they list you or designate you as an expert, or do you have several designations? And I guess for those folks who are listening, I mean, anybody can be listed by an attorney as an expert, and I mean, whether you really are good or not is a whole different thing. But an attorney simply lists you as an expert, right? And then, but they need to designate you like an expert of whatever, right? And so that would be kind of your designation. Yeah. So what is or are your designations that you've testified and been an expert in?
Yeah, right. So you bring up some interesting points. As far as being designated as an expert, obviously most of it is a credit expert, but I spent 24 years of my career in mortgage lending. So I've also, in certain cases, been designated as a mortgage expert, and sometimes as both a credit and mortgage expert. And then as far as when you talk about designation, I think maybe one thing to point out that maybe the listeners don't understand or are not aware of is when you are retained by a law firm in one of these cases and you are designated as an expert in a litigation, and let's say it goes to court. So first, let's say the first case, I believe the first case where I testified in court was an FCRA case, and it went to federal court. And I was approved by the court. And so now I've been designated in both federal and state courts as an expert. So I'm able to testify as to, let's say, my expertise and the things that are written in the report that I do for the cases. So that's sort of it's a hurdle that has to be overcome. But I think that most of your listeners, if they want to be a credit expert witness and they run a credit repair company, they probably I would say the probability is extremely high that they already possess the knowledge and expertise to be able to do similarly to what I do.
Cool. Yeah. And so we'll kind of get back on that in a second. We've got Ebony Dubois. She's watching us here on Facebook, and she said that she'd like the name of your book. So you've already written a book and you're coming out with another one. Is that right?
So yeah, the first book, it was called, and I did it with Ed Jameson, who is also an attorney. If any of your listeners remember Ed back in the day. But yeah, Ed wrote most of it, and then I wrote parts of it, and it's called Your Credit, or no, that's my new book. The book I wrote 10 years ago was called The Anatomy of Credit Scores.
Is that available on your website, or where can they find that?
Just on Amazon. Yeah, you
Okay.
can easily on Amazon. I'm sure you can probably find it for $2 or $3, maybe $5, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go, Ebony. So the anatomy of credit scores, and I'm sure if you find it, I'm sure Doug will be happy if you send it to him to notarize or to autograph it. Excuse me, and give it back. So, all right. So let's kind of jump back to this
Well,
designation.
hey, you know what, Steven, you bring up a good point. Listen, I'll tell you what. If any of your listeners want a copy of that book, all they have to do is hit me up, and if they'll just pay for the postage, I'll send them a copy of it, a signed copy of it.
So am I going to assume that whenever you say I don't raise a good point, I'm actually raising a bad point, or should I just say that that's an even better good point than my unspoken one? So, but that's awesome. So yeah, just hit up Doug here in Facebook Messenger. If you have issues getting with him, certainly you guys can message me, and he'll be happy to send you guys out a copy of his report. And so, and you've got a website, dougminer.com. Maybe they can give you a little testimonial, leave you a testimonial on your site, huh?
Sure, there you
That's
go.
how they can pay for your book. So just reach out to him. Look, Elvis Garcia's like raising the hand, Elisa. So, all right, so let's go back to the designation thing that we were talking about. So let's break
Sure.
this down a little bit more. And so basically kind of the way it works so people can kind of visualize, like, so somebody is there and watching us, and you guys you've got a lot of knowledge because you guys are running credit repair companies. So you are an expert at something. And you're like, okay, what's the next step? So an attorney would basically simply just have to say, I'm retaining you or hiring you. I want you to be an expert for XYZ, whether it's credit or whatever. And then they'll list you as that. And so, but then there's different types of experts we can talk about, Doug. So you've got non-testifying expert witnesses, which is basically the attorney hires, let's say Doug, okay, and everything in that relationship is attorney-client privilege. It's confidential because you're not going to testify. So, like, let's say the attorney's like, dude, I'm getting my ass kicked on this case over here. I need somebody to help me strategize behind the scenes. Okay, I'm going to hire Doug as a non-testifying consulting expert. That's one type of expert. Then they can have a testifying expert, which they're like, not only am I getting my ass kicked, I think the jury is going to get their ass kicked or whatever. So we need to have somebody to go out there and give testimony and actually speak out there. And so that would be a testifying consulting expert witness where you go out there, but then everything you do isn't necessarily attorney-client privilege, because if you're going out on the stand, I mean, obviously you're subject to cross-examination and having your credibility get questioned and all that kind of stuff. And then to the point that you had mentioned, where I wanted to kind of go with that, is that you had said you got some cases in federal court, and you got qualified there. And so what it means to get qualified, so you can have any attorney list you and use you as an expert, but then when it gets to where the case hits a certain benchmark, a certain stepping milestone in the court case, the other side is going to, especially if you're brand new at being an expert, they're going to try to basically impeach you, basically say, well, this guy isn't really an expert and here's why, so he needs to be kicked out. And so then you'll have a hearing in front of the judge, and basically where you're going to testify to the judge why you should be an expert, with your history, your background, your knowledge, your experience. And then the judge will make a decision. And so here's where we get to that qualified part. The judge will make a decision and say, I like that Doug Miner kind of a guy. I think he is an expert. I'm going to declare that he's qualified. Or the judge may say, I don't really think that Doug Miner guy really knows what he's talking about. He's not qualified. So yeah, he's out of here. He's not a qualified expert. So you've got just like, you can get listed as an expert, but then where the rubber meets the road is getting listed, designated as a qualified expert witness. So did I kind of give the high level on that pretty good, Doug? Or anything?
Yeah, I think a few things, right? I think you bring up some things where people, if they're interested in doing this type of work, they have to be ready for, or just, I think maybe it can be a personality issue, but be prepared that somebody's going to, question your ability. And you have to have the ability to communicate effectively that yes, you are the expert, and yes, I can testify to these particular issues. And this is why I can. This is my experience. These are my certifications. Um, and so that's part of it. And it's interesting. You bring up an interesting point, and I wanted to point this out. I didn't point out in the beginning. You asked me kind of what I do nowadays. Outside of the expert witness work, I have trained mortgage professionals and some credit repair companies, people involved in credit repair, on how to be expert witnesses. And I take them through an 8-segment course. It's 8 one-hour sessions, and I take them through each individual aspect of, from putting together your CV, basically your resume that you give to attorneys to help you get qualified with the courts, how to market your business, how to draft a report, how to prepare for a deposition, how to prepare for a trial, different types of things to look for and put in your retainer agreement as far as what you're going to do or not do and how much they're going to have to pay you. And that's probably, obviously that's the juiciest part, right? I think everyone always wants to know like how much you get paid. And I would tell you this, probably on the low end, it's probably in the $300 an hour range. It's typically probably between $300 to $500 an hour. Experts typically get paid, but obviously in certain medical situations or other aspects where it's even more highly sought after or difficult to testify to, I've seen, let's say brain surgeons or neurologists, they charge $1,000, $1,200 an hour for their testimony. So it can be highly lucrative.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because you've taken this to you've taken it to expert level, pardon the pun, you know what I mean? You've taken being an
Sure.
expert witness to expert level. And so, you'd mentioned, okay, you get paid $300 an hour minimum. So let's kind of talk about that for our listener here. Obviously you're not going to go from where you are now to all of a sudden, 0 to hero overnight. And so like, I have never been qualified, but I've been an expert witness in I think a couple dozen cases of my clients, that I've had over the years that I've sent off to an attorney to sue. And he would actually designate me as a credit reporting standards, because I'm really proficient with reading the reports based on Metro 2. And that was always been kind of my MO, if you would. And so I kind of did that and I do that as part of really just a relationship with my clients. I never took it to the next level though of going, saying, okay, I want to actually be an expert witness in the marketplace and, charge. So, for a lot of folks listening, it may very well be as simple as, when you start to get to where you can send clients to a law firm and like they're papered up really well, it's like you've got the fact pattern and the letters and everything done. There's nothing to say you can't kind of get an attorney to list you as an expert, even for some of your own client cases, and not even get paid for it, right? Just do it for free to kind of learn. And then from there, figure out how to skill up and take it to the next level if you want to. And so let's talk a little bit about that, Doug. I mean, obviously there's a lot of ways to get into the game. And so you said that you've done some of the expert training. I think a lot of people do know about the John Ulsheimer's Summit. And correct me if I'm wrong though, but you actually co-coached one of those with him a year or 2 or 3 ago. Didn't you guys joint do one of those?
Yeah, well, so John, initially we were going to do it together, and then there were some issues that I was having, and then at the towards near, John had gotten it together in Atlanta. I think it was I'm guessing it was about 2.5 years ago now. And so we did a expert witness training for some credit repair people. I think we limited it to 20 people. I think 20 is probably a good number if you're going to do a group. And yeah, we did it together, and it's great. I mean, it's John and I, we've come up against each other so many times on opposing sides of cases. And the great thing about it is that we both bring our own expertise to the situation. We both have different skill sets in relation to credit reporting and credit score type cases. And so even though we're on opposing sides, it doesn't mean that we're adversarial in any way. We're friends, and we obviously we communicate and do things together. And actually, we actually worked on a case together for the first time. There was a particular case that had some Fair Credit Billing Act issues, and John did more of the credit reporting and credit scoring side of it, and I did more of the quantifying of the damages based upon the credit and some Fair Credit Billing Act issues. But to your, there's one thing that you said, Stephen, I differ in opinion with you
Sure.
on, is that when you were saying, to all these credit repair people out there, adding it to their business, how you did, and sort of being the expert for this attorney, I wouldn't do it for free, personally. I would tell your, my suggestion would probably be to um, get some sort of a retainer together, which I can help your listeners with, and getting a basic retainer together. And maybe if they don't want to testify, or they just want to be an expert, or they want to get their feet wet, maybe charge $250 an hour, something on the lower end. But at least they'll get paid for their expertise. They'll get paid to learn how to be an expert witness. And that's, I guess, it's almost the best way to learn, right? It's just kind of, you got to jump in and give it a go, right?
Yeah, no doubt about that. And so, shifting gears a little bit, but still kind of in line with what we're talking about, getting paid as an expert witness. I know there's a lot of credit repair companies who are trying to move. I mean, and a lot of folks are trying to build relationships with attorneys and be able to partner with them in different ways. And the $1 million question is, how do you get compensated? And I know there's like one section of people that have attorneys that say, well, they'll pay them some sort of a marketing fee or something like that. I'm no lawyer or anything, so I'm no expert in that, but I know that can be, there's different opinions on whether that's fee sharing or whatever like that from the law firm. But a really clean way where you can go to a law firm, send your clients to law firms, is for them to pay you as a credit repair expert as an expert witness, right? And I have conversation with folks because they're like, man, how can I structure a relationship with a law firm, but I need to get paid, because like there's some folks who actually are going towards models where they're not even charging clients for credit repair. They literally are papering them up, doing the credit repair for free. And then they've got some law firms that they'll hand them off to, and then they need to get paid from that side. But if you've got a model like that and you've got a law firm, they can retain you as an expert witness, and then legally, lawfully, all that kind of stuff. Like say, okay, Doug, I'll pay you, instead of it being a marketing fee per se, I'll pay you maybe $300, initial expert fee to review the case file with me or something like that. And then if it goes further, I can pay you some more. So no, it's not really exactly in line with where you were going, but let's talk a little bit about that, how people can credit repair companies watching this can use the expert witness, the expert witness title and actual being one to be able to legitimately get paid by lawyers for their clients, even though if it's not going to be, the $5,000 case, but even to get a couple $100, to send somebody over. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess a couple things. I have different sort of fee schedule breakdowns and different agreements that I use in a day-to-day business, right? If somebody says, hey, Doug, what would it cost for you to look over my case and tell me if I even have a case, and so on and so forth. Nothing about being an expert witness and nothing about writing a report for it or anything like that. I'll have them tell me about the case. I'll inquire as to the types of documents that they have, how many documents that they have. And then I would say my typical fee is probably around $1,000, maybe $1,500 to go through all the documents and give them, hey, look, this is where your case is strong. I think that there's some damages here that are associated with it. I can see that there's some inaccurate reporting that's going on, and here's where it is. And I think that all falls into a lot of what your credit repair listeners are dealing with. So I use just a little one-page form for something like that. And then if they do, file a complaint and want to retain me as an expert, I'll give them my full retainer agreement and in each retainer agreement, depending upon the case, the retainer may be modified to be more specific as to what you're going to do on that particular case. Are you going to be dealing with the credit scores and the impact financially it's had on them, or are you going to be dealing with, let's say, an FCRA issue where there was some inaccurate reporting? And keep in mind, inaccurate reporting may not have really any material impact on a score, right? But the inaccurate reporting may have an issue with some underwriting guideline as far as obtaining credit that keeps them from getting credit. So I guess that's a long way of saying there's different ways to structure how you get paid, and how much, let's say, responsibility or involvement you want to have in a case. What you brought up there in the beginning about a testifying expert as opposed to just say a consulting expert, I understand it. I understand it from people telling me a lot of people don't like to testify or don't like to be deposed or don't want to be cross-examined in a trial, because it can be stressful. One of the first cases, I'll just give you a quick story. One of the first cases I did, that I was testifying on, I remember being on the stand and there were 3 attorneys sitting at the table, and they were representing a large institutional bank that we're all very familiar with. It's probably on every corner in every city in the United States. And the attorneys sitting at the table had their laptops open and were feeding the attorney asking me questions. And the interesting part was, this was one of the first cases I ever did. And the attorney asked me how much I was being paid. And I said $275 an hour. And I think his next question was, have you ever been paid anything more than that? And I said, no. And he says, well, it says here that you get paid $425 an hour. I said, that's fine. It can say that, but I've never been paid more than $275 for my services at that point. And what had happened was, there was a part of being an expert witness. There are brokerages. They'll broker your services out to law firms, and they tack on $125, $150 an hour to whatever you charge hourly. That's how they get paid. And so they were pulling something off of the internet that said I cost $425 an hour, although I'd never been paid that. So they'll go to a lot of links to find information about you to try to discredit you in some way. And but if you're okay with that and you can stand up to that, I think there's a few things as being an expert witness. You have to be, first and foremost, you have to be competent. You have to have the skills to do it. I think the second part is you have to have the confidence in your knowledge and be able to communicate that well. And I think there's a component there where I think certain personalities can deal with it and others don't. I've heard of people trying expert and they get questioned and they don't ever want to do it again.
Well, and I think, one of the cool things about you doing this show with me, because you had mentioned, you're open to scrutiny and they'll try to find things, and not all expert witnesses really, would be down with doing bi-weekly shows and stuff like this, just because, I mean, you at the end of the year, you're going to have 30 hours of recorded content, if you misspeak on something or whatever. I mean, if they want to try to go back and find all this stuff and put the screws to you, but we've had this conversation before, and you're like, man, I'm confident in what I do. I mean, there's nothing out here. I mean, I'm not going to live in fear just because I'm an expert. I'm going to tell my story and share my story. And so I think that's really cool. And I think that's one thing a lot of our listeners here can appreciate, is because it is really hard to find folks with your level of skill, somebody who's really been in hundreds of court cases, that's just willing to go out and just really, just mingle with the community like this and share your story and stuff. And so, you'd mentioned earlier that, you're happy to coach folks and things like that. And so, I mean, my understanding is that there's really not very many folks in the credit space as far as expert witnesses. And, even in the pre-litigation training course that I have, which you're in also, which is kind of cool. But, we've got a few attorneys in the pre-litigation training course, and, they're like, Steven, there's just not a lot of credit repair expert witnesses, and we'd love to get more folks in there. And so, I mean, it seems like you take more of an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset as talking about it, because you're like, hey, man, I mean, you're confident in where you are. You've built this thing up. You've got your attorney network, nice and solid. And if other people want to come in, to your point, everybody has a little bit of a different niche, and I think that's really true because, I mean, I was really good and I'm really good with talking about Metro 2, like credit reporting issues and how the reports report differently. And I was really good and I'm good at being a credit reporting standards. You've got a little bit of a different, like you had mentioned the Fair Credit Billing Act, right? You don't want to put me up on the stand on that. And I know, somebody like John, he worked for, I think for Equifax, if I'm not mistaken. And he's got a lot of, and I think he worked for FICO, right? So he has a lot of really like score knowledge. Not that I'm speaking for John, but, point there being is that everybody has a little bit of a different niche and skill set. And I think for the folks listening, we all come from different places when we start our businesses. I was actually in the car business. I was a finance manager. I never was in like the mortgage side of things, but I knew lending from the car business finance side. We all get into this business with a different idea of how things should be, different goals for what we're trying to do for our clients, different perceptions and different skill sets. And so, maybe let's just kind of touch on that for a little bit. I mean, looking into the future for folks that are watching this, maybe even folks who are just brand new in credit repair and they're like, oh my gosh, I mean, I'm like a nobody. Well, that's not really, that's not the right mindset, right? I mean, if somebody's like, I'd really like to be up there, I guess first take inventory of what are your mental skills, right? Like what skills do you have that you can work off of? And, how can somebody climb the ladder up there? I mean, you think you help them get their resume polished up and just tell them to go out and start finding attorneys. I mean, what would you recommend for somebody who's brand new, totally green, but is like, dude, I just want to go out and get my first expert witness case?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I would say it this way. So in when I did the training with John in Atlanta, and then when I've done it one-on-one with clients, and I've done small groups myself, that's what, first and foremost, if you look at it this way, if you really are interested and you want to do this type of work, because like I said, it can be very lucrative, whether it's $300, $400, $500 an hour type work. A typical case, you're going to get a retainer of $5,000 or more, some 10,000. It just depends on the case. And then, go through a training. I mean, they can take my course with me. It's one-on-one. And I think that tends to be the best, because then what you're talking about, I can focus on what are your specific areas where you can excel in this type of work. I think for me, a lot of what I do is based around my mortgage background, and the mortgage background being that it's typically everyone's biggest investment, and it's usually the biggest place where damages can occur in an expert witness, in a credit expert witness case, or even a mortgage case, right? If someone's credit's damaged and they can either buy a home that they want to buy, or they can't refinance their existing home into a lower interest rate. Those are where the damages really start to calculate up, and the dollar amounts can get pretty large pretty quickly, especially here, let's say in a high net worth area, right? Or a large mortgage amount. So the cases that I tend to end up being involved with sort of fall into, I'll give it three basic categories. One would be family law is probably one of them. Mortgage related issues, whether it's with a servicer or some sort of wrongful foreclosure, something along those lines. And then the other third is just a mixture of all different types. It can be a contract. It can be a car accident victim, right? They're injured in a car accident. They can't work. They can't pay their bills. Their credit goes down. I've had wrongful termination cases. Just there's lots of different ways. If you really think about it, people's credit can be impacted in so many different ways in their life. And so my reports are a lot about how information is being reported, and it's a lot about quantifying the damages that can occur from injuring somebody's credit profile. And then that's sort of where I feel like I do my best work.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as far as like, skilling up to really be able to be worth it, I know a resource that both you and I have used is the National Consumer Law Center,
Yeah.
those series of law books. And so, for folks out here who, again, may not really have a high level of experience, but, what would you say are some of the things that are kind of essential for them to be able to have resources and tools? I guess, and for those folks who are listening, there's an organization called the National Consumer Law Center, NCLC, and they have a digital library. Well, they have paper books and digital books, amazing law books. One of them is Fair Credit Reporting. But I mean, obviously, other than them buying Doug Miner's book, right? Because that's going to be resource number one, is buy Doug's book. But I mean,
No.
what are some things, just kind of like toolbox 101? What's the basic tools of the trade? Okay, so that's the National Consumer Law Center books that we're talking
Yeah.
about.
Talk about that. A lot of it too. Also, you have here. I'm in my office. Have your credit reporting resource guide, your Metro 2 book, right?
Right.
But I think kind of what you're getting at, Steven, is I'm gonna take it in a little bit different direction. I think it's more about building your CV, your curriculum vitae, your resume. Probably more. It's different than a resume, but it's the best way to communicate it at this who don't understand what a CV is. But
it's different, but it's not. It's kind of like when people say I'm kidding, but not really.
Yeah.
We say it's different than the resume, but it's really not. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
go ahead though.
Yeah, it focuses more on your abilities, and I think the ways to bolster your CV would be to write articles, speak at different events, get certified in different ways, right? Whether it's, back in the day, I went to the CDIA, right? The Consumer Data Industry Association, the FCRA certification. I hadn't said that in a while. I had to spit it out. But all of these things these events, I think that your listeners would go to, Matt Listro, his conference in Vegas typically is a good way to get certified and get certifications in whatever your expertise is. So obviously from my mortgage background, I have certain mortgage designations and certifications and courses that I've taken. And you do the same with your credit repair business or your credit involvement. Anything that will help bolster your CV and make it look better. TV appearances, radio appearances, speaking events, writing articles, writing books, all of those types of things will set you apart as an expert. And I think, I'll just go back to, I always say about the first book, The Anatomy of Credit Scores, it was probably the best marketing tool that I've ever used, right? If you can write a book, it separates you from quite a few of your competition.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. We've got some questions coming in. So Ebony Dubois,
okay.
Where can she obtain the Metro 2 manual? And so, yeah, like I was lucky. I was able to buy one back in 2009 and they mailed me that big binder like the one you just had, but they do make it tough to get your hands on. Yeah, I've heard stories of people, credit repair owners, who in recent years would go to the CDIA website, order it, it takes their money, and then before they mail it out, I guess they look and see who you are in your email domain, and they're like, oh, this is a credit repair guy. They refund them their money and they don't mail the book. But they've got some copies floating around. In our training course, we've actually got a 2020 digital version that we've got that we found online attached to a court case, which is really cool. And so, I mean, there are copies around. Our training course has one. And so if you Google hard enough, you could probably find a digital version of that manual. Looks like some of you folks are going to tag her in that. So that's really cool. So, as far as Metro 2, I mean, let's talk about that as we kind of wrap this up, for today's episode, the flagship one. Let's kind of wrap it up maybe with Metro 2 a little bit. And so I think there still is a lot of misunderstanding on what Metro 2 is. A lot of people say it's a computer language. It's not. It's a data format, so it's a unified way of reporting standardized data that can be interchanged. It's a format. And so, what was your knowledge of Metro 2 when you first really started getting into the expert witness thing? I mean, were you using that in your credit repair business and like saying, hey, your format says that it should be reported this way and your report says it's reporting this way, and so there's a problem? And were you doing your disputes that way based on Metro 2, or at what point did you become proficient with the Metro 2 format?
I'd have to think about that. I don't remember when I received my first Metro 2 format. I have to think about that. But yes, I mean, as far as using a Metro 2 format or being able to go through the frequently asked questions or, special comment codes or situational ways of using different codes is helpful, right? I think as an expert witness, when you guys would understand the ACDV exchange, and once you have a completed ACDV that, let's say you're able to review, that has, in my opinion, inaccurate reporting on it, and you're able to sort of back up your opinion and back up what you found with certain data, it can be really helpful. I'm not going to say that it's absolutely necessary, but it's a helpful tool. I think all of these sorts of things, like you're talking about the NCLC, I mean, those are really great, helpful tools, right? And I think having the Metro 2 format, it's a great tool and a great way to go about it. But I don't want to discourage all your listeners and say, okay, it's, you absolutely have to have this or you can't do the job. I think that you can do, you could do a certain level of work without it.
Well, and I think that ties back to, I guess, really what your expertise, your expert designation is going to be. I mean, if you're going up there talking about the credit reporting and why it's inaccurate, I mean, if you're going to get on a technical granular level, I think Metro 2 is almost like a must-have, must-know. But then, like if somebody has, knowledge in certain industries that use credit reports, like if you worked in the mortgage industry for 10 years and you saw these reports and you saw how certain errors affected scores or underwriting, like that doesn't even require Metro 2 at all per se. But you can still use that knowledge as an expert. And that's why I think, there's any number of ways where folks can become an expert, kind of find what their little niche is based on their expertise. And so Metro 2 isn't necessarily required, but if you're, I mean, my personal perspective is if you're going to be in credit repair, it's kind of necessary because it's the industry standard for how to report accurate data. And accuracy, a lot of folks will say, well, Metro 2 is not the law, and so you can't sue on Metro 2. And I mean, although that's a true statement, Metro 2 is not the law, and you're not going to like file a lawsuit and say, cause of action or claim number one, you reported this field wrong. No, but what you would do is that's the reason for the violation of the law. And so, the FCRA requires maximum possible accuracy of the information, and accuracy is actually not a defined word. And so, like if you look at the beginning of the FCRA 1681A, that's an entire section on definitions. They define a lot of terms, like consumer reporting agency is defined, consumer is defined, consumer report, but the word accuracy is not defined. So the law requires that the reporting be maximum possible accuracy, but they left it up to plain English to figure out what accuracy means. Well, the reporting industry got together and created their own standard, which is known as Metro 2. So if they don't follow their own standard, how can their procedures be reasonable? Because the FCRA is a reasonable procedures-driven law. So, that's kind of where, from what I share with folks, what we teach in my training course is kind of like, I mean, if you can't lean on the industry standard to define accuracy, then you can't define accuracy because the FCRA does not define accuracy, right? And so that's how you're able to tie that together to the law. And so, but based on what you see up there, I mean, in the cases, I guess just as a general percentage, I mean, I guess most of your cases don't come from credit repair companies. Is that fair to say? I mean, most of the cases you're in are just kind of like Joe Consumer goes to the lawyer and then they've just got like a credit problem, or a lot of these actually coming from credit repair companies.
I would say none of the cases that I work on that I can recall came from a credit repair company, right? The majority of the cases that I do work on are either they've been referred to me in some way. They've found me through some sort of online search. And it's interesting how people come in these cases come to me. That sometimes it's the actual person that's been harmed by the situation. I've had consumers say to me, yeah, I told my attorney about it, and he said, well, if you can find somebody, we'll talk to him about it. So the actual plaintiff in the case contacted me first, then I spoke to the attorney. So it can come in any number of ways. The cases can come to you, right? And
Yeah.
it's just a matter of, I guess it's a persistence, and if you want to do this kind of work, it does take some effort, and just focusing on, like we've talked about, where you want to be in it, what do you want to work on. I really enjoy quantifying the damages side of it. I do. The mathematical side of it and the financial side of it is of large interest to me. But I also enjoy just, whether it's, doing simulated score models, right?
Yeah.
Simulating someone's score based upon information being on a report or not being on a report, right? And I think Steven, you brought up a good part where if you were in auto finance, I think I've had a couple of cases where there were car dealerships that were involved in the litigation. I think one there was an ex-wife who'd been in cahoots with like a salesperson at a car dealership, or maybe even the finance manager, and they bought a car in her ex-husband's social security number. So it's interesting. The cases are far more varied than I can even express here. You know what I mean?
There was a little fraud involved, is what you're saying.
I'm not gonna. That wasn't my part of the case, right?
No. But it's interesting what you get to see with court cases and with litigation. And I remember early on, 2012, 13 or so, one of my earlier court cases with just one of my clients, and we were in like a settlement conversation with the bureaus, and it was really an eye opener, the amount of information that they have, because again, they've been sued by my client and we're trying to settle the case. And one of the bureaus basically, has a big giant stack of printed up documents, basically dispute documents that they had received that was in the consumer's file. And they know what my stuff looks like. And I mean, because my work is, they know what my work looks like, and it comes from my letterhead, and I sign my name on it with the power of attorney. So, but they slid across what was basically that Federal Trade Commission identity theft, the FTC identity theft affidavit. And they were like, Mr. Palmieri, do you recognize this? I'm like, well, I recognize what that is. It's an FTC identity theft affidavit, but I have never seen this before. I don't know what it is. And this client was not a fraud victim or whatever. And they're like, would it surprise you to know this came from Mr. So-and-so's file? I'm like, yeah, I have no idea about any of that. And they know that I'm not involved with that. Well, long story short, obviously somewhere this consumer had gone to one of these other sweep type places, right? And they did the FTC affidavit, and it had like a bogus police report, but the thing was notarized. So then they've obviously got some notaries in on the scam that are forging. Well, I can only assume it was a forged police report, because
Okay.
This guy was not a victim of fraud. And he was like, so the client, we were like, hold on. And we went and talked to the client, and he was like, yeah, I paid this guy like $2,000 or whatever. And he just told me to sign a few things. And he was going to wipe me clean or whatever. And obviously that didn't work out because,
Wow.
But it was interesting because it's kind of like, I think it's an eye-opening perspective if you take your profession to the next level, just even dealing with the legal side of things in any capacity, because you get to realize that all of the bureaus, they're kind of the enemy, but they get a lot of garbage on their end as well, is kind of my point. And they're, inundated with all this fraudulent stuff from people right here in our industry. And, it's illegal to send fake police reports and fake identity theft affidavits when there's no fraud involved with it. And so it was really interesting seeing what they have to deal with as well. That was really kind of an eye opener. And then they slid it out there, and it kind of like, it's kind of like checkmate to your client. So, obviously that settlement conversation didn't really go where he wanting to get all the deletions. It was more like, we'll just let your ass go, and we'll just kind of we'll just let you out of this case, and just don't, be happy we don't countersue your ass for, committing fraud against us or something. But that was one of the biggest things when I was first getting involved in this, is just kind of seeing like the inside of the machine. You know what I mean? And that they're
Yeah, keep in mind, I mean, you do under certain circumstances have to non-disclosure forms, that you have to sign. And I think maybe one of the other things maybe that's probably really important to point out to everyone is that I guess in general, my general understanding of cases that actually go to litigation is somewhere around the 5% range. So the majority of the cases that you work on, you do not have to testify on.
right.
But interesting, I will say, 10 years ago, I think more of the cases went to court. And I think that was because it was more, it seemed to be a newer area. There wasn't as many cases going on. And I don't know that the courts understood what, let's say, a credit expert like myself was bringing to the table or bringing to a case. But I think now, obviously, there's been a lot of very well recognized cases, and there's been lots of verdicts, and there's jury awards and things of that nature that have been in the 7-figure range and above. And so now I think that most cases settle. And like I said, my understanding is on average it's around 5% of cases actually go to trial. So actually, there's another area too where you can just I charge a designation fee, and basically what that means is that, let's say a law firm contacts you about a case and they're not sure if they're going to need to retain your services, but they want to designate you as their expert. And a quick story is somebody had designated me as an expert on a case where they had never spoken to me and they had never contacted me. And so I do charge, if to just put my name and designate me, I charge $1,000 fee just to put my name.
That's like those rental mailbox, like the UPS store. If you just want to get, it's their address, but then you've got like a dash, and then your mailbox number. So, you're charging them $1,000 just to rent the use of your name, basically, to say we've got Doug Miner as an expert, even though we've never seen him, spoken with him, or even know who the guy is. Right?
Well, that nowadays, so that happened without my knowledge, right? Somebody did that completely without my knowledge, but now, and I do work that into my retainer, and there's different parts of the agreement where they don't have to pay for it. But those 2 points, right, where you're designated, and I had someone I know very closely that was designated and charged $1,500 on 2 separate cases, and nothing ever happened in either case. The person never had to look over documents. The person never had to testify, never had to do anything, and essentially made $3,000 without having to do anything.
Yeah.
So
their name or whatever, something simple. But hey, a profit's not a dirty word. And if you get to where your name is worth something and your service, I mean, that's a service, right? So, that's the name of the game. Everybody, I think should aspire to get there. We've got Ali Rubalcava over. She's in California, along with you. She's got a little comment. She's got a pretty large credit repair company. She says, I've found some local judges that do not know or comprehend a lot of the credit laws, i.e. filings after statute of limitations are exceeded and the judges refuse to dismiss the case because they don't understand the law and they still try to make the consumers pay and stuff like that. And so, I mean, all we can say there is, well, yeah, I mean, a lot of judges I would say are just average. And even if they're extraordinary, the law is, the law code, the US code is enormous. I mean, it's massive. And then even if they really, can memorize the US code, they don't necessarily understand all the industries behind that. And that's where I think us as credit repair companies doing our jobs right, setting these things up in that pre-litigation mindset during the dispute. And then the expert witness level helps to bridge that gap with the attorney. So then you can go in front of the judge. I mean, the judge, he gets everything in front of him every single day, right? And so that's why he's called a judge. He needs to judge it, right? So you need to be able to convince him and say, well, judge, there's a statute of limitations and here's where we get it from. And, here's why it's exceeded and whatever. And so I think that kind of drills home even more reason why it's, there is unlimited opportunity for folks to skill up, expert up, put themselves out there where they can help attorneys, for these cases, because, you don't want to be able to bring cases where people just don't understand it. And
Yeah.
so, so as we wrap this one up here, then, how can folks contact you? Is it dougminer.com? Is that the best way? What's the best way for them to get a hold of
Yeah,
you?
sure.
That
Well,
way.
I think of a couple different ways, whichever way they want to. But as you know, Stephen, my email address is doug@dougminer.com. It's the easiest way to email me. They can hit me up here on Facebook in the group. I see a couple people have, and I'll get back to them when we're done.
Don't forget
Uh,
my 5% commission on anything you close. All right. At least
okay.
just mail me a pizza. All right. Something. So just kidding.
uh, but yeah, look, I love doing this stuff. It's super fun. It's funny. My friends that are close to me, and I explain to them kind of what I do. I'm always sort of in this. I have a sense where if I'm with people just in general, I'm like, well, what do you do for a living? And they start telling me, I'm like, well, look, you could do what I do. Just do it in what your field is, right? It doesn't. I feel like there's part of me that. I think a lot of people have a lot of expertise in different areas. And I say this because I've been to some expert witness sort of, I don't know if I call it a convention, but there's, 200 experts there, and some of them are geological experts. Some of them are, neurologists. Some are CPAs. There are experts working as expert witnesses in some of the things you can't even imagine out there in the world.
Right.
So I guess I think the big sort of umbrella of this sort of first show is that, look, if it's something that you want to do, I have a feeling you probably already have the skill set to do it. It's just sort of fine tuning and knowing how to go get the business and sort of what you want to focus on. And I think that's where in the course that I teach, that's what I focus on. We focus on the individual, where they're going to focus their efforts, how they can get the business, and make sure that it's cost effective. And if they enjoy doing the work, it's a great thing to be able to do. And it's funny. When I started doing it, one of the things that I've sort of thought is that this is something that you can do well into your 70s. People, I've come across some expert witnesses in different fields that are, retired. They've been retired for 20 years or more, and they still do expert witness work because they can still do it and they enjoy it. And it's, in retirement, it's not a bad gig for guys in that age bracket, or women, whoever it is. Right. So it can be a career. It can be a way to enhance your income. It's a way to maybe separate yourself from other expert or credit repair people. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, and I think everybody has their own motivation to sort of get into doing this kind of work. For myself, I enjoy it. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do is to testify in court.
There you go. That's a
yeah.
kind of person who likes doing that, because a lot of them don't. So, but
Yeah.
on that note, I think, what better way to close out our first episode here of Expert Witness with Doug Miner and Steven Palmieri. And for those of you guys watching live, appreciate you guys for doing that and all the interaction here. And, feel free to reach out to Doug at dougminer.com, or go to his website, dougminer.com. You can reach me, stevenpalmieri.com. And we've got our pre-litigation training course as well. So if you want to dive deep into pre-litigation disputes Metro 2, give me a call, reach me on Facebook, or however you'd like to contact me. So that being said, appreciate you guys for watching, and we'll see you back here on the first and the third Thursday of every month. You guys be good.